On the evening of October 25th, 2023, inside a private school in central Sydney, security cameras recorded something no one watching in real time understood the meaning of yet. A young man practiced over and over how he would rush into a bathroom while holding a hammer. He tried different bathrooms. He switched which hand held the weapon. He repeated the motion again and again. Investigators would later call these rehearsals dry runs. He eventually chose a disabled bathroom. He blocked access to another one with a cleaning sign. Then, he waited. 21-year-old Lilie James, a university student and sports coach at the school, returned that evening from coaching water polo. Camera footage shows her relaxed, smiling, moving through a place where she worked and where she should have been safe. She walked toward the bathrooms carrying her swimmers. The man was already there, waiting, holding the hammer. He stood outside for about 2 minutes. Then he lunged inside. He did not come back out for more than an hour. How does a relationship that lasted only a matter of weeks end in a killing this carefully rehearsed? And were the warning signs already there, long before that night? If a story like this deserves to be told with real care, not rushed sensationalism, stay with me and consider joining this channel for more respectful, true stories. Before this becomes a story about violence, it's worth knowing who Lilie James was. She was born in May of 2002 in New South Wales, Australia. She grew up in Sanford, in southern Sydney, with her father Jamie, her mother Peta, and her younger brother Max. Later evidence presented at a coronial inquest described her relationship with her family as close and loving. She was 21 years old when she died. Lilie attended Danebank Anglican School for Girls in Hurstville, from kindergarten all the way through year 12, graduating in 2020. She was remembered as outgoing, bright, highly motivated, caring, and socially confident. Friends later said she seemed capable of doing almost anything she set her mind to. Sport was one of the defining threads of her life. She was a competitive swimmer, described by those who knew her as a genuine champion in the water. She also played water polo, following a sporting path closely tied to her family. Sport eventually became more than a hobby. It became the direction of her education and her career. She also danced and performed in theater. One notable achievement was a monologue performance from Shakespeare's Macbeth, blending movement with dramatic performance. Video of that performance later became part of the public tributes shared after her death. It matters that Lilie was never defined only by the way her life ended. She was an athlete, a performer, a student, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a coach who helped her younger brother with schoolwork and who made time for him even as her own adult life got busier and busier. After graduating from Danebank, Lilie enrolled at the University of Technology, Sydney, studying toward a degree connected to sports management and sports business. At the time of her death, she was still completing that degree. While working at St. Andrew's Cathedral School, a well-known school in the heart of Sydney's business district. There, she worked as a sports assistant and coached swimming and water polo. She was highly regarded by both students and colleagues, known for taking the time to encourage the young people she coached individually and making them feel genuinely valued. The man responsible for what happened to her was Paul Thijssen. Paul was born in the Netherlands in November of 1999, an only child. His family moved to Australia around 2015, and he attended the same school where Lilie would later work, St. Andrew's Cathedral School. He became deeply involved in school sport and student leadership, serving as a sports captain and school prefect, and playing cricket and hockey. He graduated in 2017. He was 23 years old when he died in October of 2023, though some early reporting mistakenly described him as 24. After finishing school, Paul later returned to work at St. Andrews, coaching sport and helping coordinate after-hours activities. He also had connections to other sporting organizations and schools around Sydney. That overlap of professional circles is ultimately how he and Lilie came to know each other. Before looking at what happened between Lilie and Paul, It's important to understand something the later coronial inquest specifically examined, whether Paul had shown similar behavior in earlier relationships, and whether those patterns should have been recognized as warning signs. One of Paul's former girlfriends, identified in reporting simply as Freya, described a relationship that became increasingly controlling. According to evidence presented at the inquest, Paul wanted her to continuously share her phone's location with him. When she turned that location sharing off, he allegedly became extremely angry. She described the relationship as becoming, in her words, suffocating. Reported behaviors included excessive attempts at contact, becoming visibly upset over ordinary changes on social media, and unwanted deliveries. When she tried to create distance and eventually blocked him. The inquest heard that he found a way into her Snapchat account regardless, to keep communicating with her. After that relationship ended, the inquest heard that Paul punched branches on a tree near her. When someone asked him why, he reportedly said, "Because I can't punch the one thing I want to." He was later seen outside her home, including early in the morning, simply looking toward the property. Her father eventually threatened to seek a formal protection order if Paul did not stay away. This earlier history became significant once investigators began examining what happened after Lilie ended things with Paul, years later. By 2023, evidence gathered by police suggested that parts of the image Paul presented to the people around him did not match reality. He had told family and friends he was studying a Master of Teaching at the University of Sydney. Investigators later found no record that he had ever been enrolled there. Paul was living in Australia on a working holiday visa, and by 2023, he was reportedly on his third and final available visa of that kind. Police later found problems with information connected to that visa process, including reporting from the inquest describing an allegedly forged or misleading employment reference tied to St. Andrews, apparently used to help satisfy visa requirements. This should be understood as context, not as a motive on its own. Forensic experts who later testified at the inquest suggested Paul may have compensated for a fragile sense of self by projecting an image of competence and success to the people around him. Clinical and forensic psychologist Dr. Katie Seidler described him as someone who presented himself as having everything under control and as highly capable. That expert framing becomes important later, in understanding the collapse of that image once Lilie rejected him. Lilie and Paul knew each other through their shared work at St. Andrews and began a romantic relationship around August of 2023. Different reporting describes it lasting somewhere between roughly 5 weeks and about 2 months. The eventual coronial findings characterized it simply as a brief relationship. Early on, there was apparently nothing that gave Lilie reason to believe she was facing any real danger. That makes the final camera footage from the night she died especially powerful, because even in the moments right before she walked into that bathroom, she appeared to be interacting with Paul completely normally. Evidence at the inquest showed that Paul frequently checked Lilie's location through Snapchat throughout their relationship. This became one of the central themes in the coroner's eventual findings. How something that can look like an ordinary, even affectionate habit among young couples can quietly become a tool of control. The coroner specifically highlighted the broader risks connected to casual, routine location sharing among young people. The inquest also heard that Paul created a second, fake Snapchat account, using a female identity, though it was linked back to his own phone number. Lilie eventually became suspicious after the account was suggested to her as a possible contact. When confronted, Paul reportedly denied having created it. According to the material available, he claimed another woman had made the account because she wanted to see what Lilie looked like. Police later interviewed that woman. She reportedly denied knowing anything about it. The account was ultimately traced back to Paul. The inquest additionally heard that Paul showed friends an intimate image Lilie had privately sent him. Later coronial findings described this among the manipulative and emotionally abusive behaviors that occurred as Lilie began trying to end the relationship, and experts interpreted it within the broader context of coercive control, an attempt to reassert dominance as he sensed he was losing it. In the days before her death, Evidence suggests Lilie was increasingly uncomfortable around Paul. According to testimony reported from the inquest, she told someone she felt unsafe, or, in her own words, weirded out by him. That detail matters, because it shows the warning signs had already become visible to Lilie herself, even before the worst of what followed. The inquest was shown camera footage of an argument between the two of them, shortly before the killing. The confrontation reportedly lasted several minutes, and Paul was seen behaving aggressively, including shoving Lilie and cornering her. It stands as one of the clearest visual signs of escalating controlling behavior before the homicide that would follow. On Friday, October 20th, Lilie attended a 21st birthday celebration. A former romantic partner of hers was also there. Paul was elsewhere that night with his own friends, but repeatedly checked Lilie's location through Snapchat and appeared visibly stressed and unhappy throughout the evening. That night, Lilie ended the relationship. Paul apparently wanted to keep discussing it. According to one account, after Lilie said it was over, he suggested they continue as, in his words, friends with benefits. Lilie declined. According to the coroner's later assessment, that rejection became the catalyst for a dramatic escalation in Paul's controlling and abusive behavior. The day after the breakup, Paul rented a vehicle through a car-sharing service and drove toward Lilie's family home. Evidence later recovered by investigators included photographs he had taken of vehicles parked outside the James family property, some annotated with notes about who each car likely belonged to. Over the days between the breakup and the killing, the inquest heard that Paul traveled to the area near Lilie's home 7 separate times. He would reportedly linger briefly nearby, then leave. Investigators concluded these were not ordinary social visits. The coroner's final findings characterized this pattern plainly as physical stalking. Investigators ultimately concluded that what happened 5 days later was not some sudden, impulsive confrontation. The inquest heard clear evidence of deliberate planning. That distinction matters enormously. The coroner explicitly rejected any suggestion that the killing represented a sudden, uncontrolled loss of temper. On Wednesday, October 25th, Lilie went about an entirely ordinary day, attending to her university coursework and her job, and later coaching water polo at St. Andrews. She also planned to play water polo herself that evening. Nothing about her day suggests she had any idea of what was being prepared for her. Paul arrived at the school that day as well. Camera footage later revealed that in the hours before Lilie returned, he repeatedly tested different bathrooms and practiced how he would enter one while holding a hammer. The inquest referred to these repeated rehearsals as dry runs. Footage reportedly showed him lunging into more than one bathroom during this process, switching which hand held the hammer, repeating the motion, before eventually settling on a disabled bathroom as the location for the attack. He also placed a cleaning in progress sign in front of another bathroom nearby. Evidence at the inquest suggested this was meant to guide Lilie toward the specific bathroom he had already chosen. Footage also showed him disabling the automatic sliding doors nearby, which counsel assisting the inquest suggested was intended to reduce the risk of a school cleaner interrupting him. At approximately 7:11 that evening, Lilie returned from water polo training with a group of students. She was getting ready to change into her own swimmers ahead of a game, and was seen carrying her swimming gear toward the bathroom. The footage from this moment shows her smiling and interacting completely normally with Paul. Counsel assisting the inquest specifically emphasized that nothing in her behavior suggested she had any idea what he intended to do. That contrast, her ordinary evening against his months, or at minimum days of preparation, is one of the most devastating parts of this entire case. Lilie entered the disabled bathroom. Paul stood outside, holding the hammer. He remained there for about 2 minutes. At one point, he appeared to glance toward the security camera. Then he lunged inside. He remained inside for more than an hour. One source places the length of time at approximately 1 hour and 12 minutes. No graphic reconstruction of what happened during that time is necessary here, and none will be offered. The evidentiary facts alone are powerful enough. The final coroner determined that Lilie died from multiple blunt force injuries to her head and neck, caused by a hammer. Reporting from the inquest stated she suffered approximately 25 separate blunt force injuries. She also had injuries to her hands and arms consistent with attempts to defend herself. There was no evidence of sexual assault. After the attack, Paul took Lilie's phone. Messages were then sent from her device to her father, Jamie. One version of the message disclosed at the inquest read, "Don't ask why or call. Please come to the school now and pick me up." On August 10, 2026, a young woman once known to millions of followers online walked into a Miami courtroom wearing jail clothing. 4 years earlier, almost to the day, she had been arrested in Hawaii, accused of second-degree murder. Now, instead of standing before a jury, she accepted a negotiated plea. The murder charge was replaced with manslaughter with a deadly weapon. She admitted, formally, that she had caused the stab wound that killed a 27-year-old man named Christian Obumseli, known to everyone who loved him as Toby. She was sentenced to 6 years in state prison, with credit for nearly 4 years she had already spent behind bars, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. For more than 4 years, this case had been defined by one central unresolved question. Was Christian's death the result of an intentional act of escalating violence, as prosecutors argued? Or was it something else entirely? An act committed by a woman who genuinely believed she was defending her own life, as her lawyers maintained until the very end. The guilty plea closed the criminal case. It did not fully answer that question. If a story like this deserves careful, honest treatment rather than easy conclusions, stay with me and consider joining this channel for more respectful true stories. Before this becomes a story about a courtroom, it's worth remembering who Christian Obumseli actually was. He was 27 years old when he died, originally from the Plano, Texas area. His family knew him as Christian, or by his nickname Toby. His mother is Chio Obumseli. His older brother is Jeffrey. Extended family described him as kind-hearted, compassionate, friendly, respectful, and generous toward people in need. His mother once recalled a moment when Christian encouraged her to give more help to a homeless man than she had originally planned to give. His family has said, again and again, that he should not be remembered only for the way his life ended. He was a son, a brother, a cousin, a nephew, a grandson, and a friend. Someone whose future was taken from him. Courtney Clenney was a social media personality and OnlyFans model, also known online as Courtney Taylor. By the time of her arrest, she had reportedly accumulated more than 2 million followers on Instagram. She was originally from the Austin, Texas area. By the time of her plea hearing in August of 2026, she was 30 years old. Her parents are Kim and Deborah Clenney. During her plea hearing, Courtney said she had been diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. According to the agreed statement of facts both sides accepted as part of the plea, Courtney and Christian began dating in late 2020. The relationship itself was later formally described, by agreement of both parties, as extremely tempestuous and combative. That same agreed statement acknowledged that both of them were involved in numerous domestic violence incidents throughout the relationship. What that actually meant, though, depended entirely on who was describing it. Prosecutors and Christian's family came to view Christian as the victim of escalating domestic violence. They pointed to video and audio evidence they said showed Courtney striking him, pushing him, berating him, screaming at him, and at times using racist insults. In their view, his death was the culmination of a pattern of aggression that had been building for a long time. Courtney's attorneys told a very different story. They maintained that she herself had endured abuse throughout the relationship and argued she suffered from what is sometimes called battered woman syndrome. They said witnesses, medical records, building security incidents, and prior police contacts would have supported her version of events, even after she ultimately pleaded guilty. Her lawyers continued to say publicly that she acted because she feared for her life. Because the case ended in a negotiated plea Rather than a full murder trial, a jury never actually weighed every disputed claim from their relationship and never issued a verdict resolving which version was true. In January of 2022, Courtney and Christian moved to South Florida, settling into a luxury condominium complex called One Paraíso on Northeast 7th Avenue in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood. According to the agreed factual statement, other residents and the building's security staff made numerous complaints about the couple during the roughly 3 months they lived there. Management was reportedly already in the process of trying to evict them. One of the most important pieces of evidence prosecutors would later rely on came from roughly 2 months before Christian died, surveillance footage from inside the building's elevator. According to reporting describing that footage, Courtney became angry and repeatedly struck at Christian while he raised his hands and tried to block the blows, eventually slapping or pushing him as the elevator ride came to an end. Prosecutors used this footage to argue that Courtney had a documented, ongoing pattern of physical aggression toward Christian. Separately, Christian reportedly recorded several of their arguments during the relationship. Some of those recordings allegedly captured Courtney screaming, insulting him, berating him, and at times using racial slurs. One dispute reportedly centered on Christian having spoken to another woman while out riding a bicycle. Courtney's defense challenged the use of these recordings at trial, arguing in part that they were private communications not sufficiently connected to the events of the fatal night. Christian's family later claimed, through statements made during sentencing, that Courtney had cut his face during an earlier incident and had previously stabbed him in the leg. They said Christian had written something suggesting he feared his love for Courtney might eventually get him killed. These are serious allegations, but they came through the family's own statements to the court and should be understood as exactly that, rather than as facts independently proven in a courtroom. Courtney's defense, for its part, said they were prepared to call an entirely different set of witnesses at trial. A neighbor who allegedly saw Christian repeatedly hitting Courtney during a separate incident. A store employee who allegedly saw bruises on her arms. Witnesses connected to earlier building security incidents, and police officers who had responded to prior disputes between the couple. Medical evidence documenting injuries she said she had suffered. And expert witnesses in domestic violence, including Dr. Lenore Walker, a name closely associated with the concept of battered woman syndrome. The defense also said Courtney had sought help shortly before Christian's death and had discussed obtaining a restraining order. On April 3, 2022, Courtney and Christian were inside their apartment at One Paraíso. An argument broke out. Exactly what happened in the minutes immediately before the stabbing became the single most contested issue in the entire case. According to Courtney's own account, given to investigators, Christian threw her against a wall and choked her to the point she said she could not breathe. She claimed this had happened before as well. After he released her, she said she contacted her mother. She then said she moved toward the kitchen and that Christian began moving, or charging, toward her. She said she picked up a knife and warned him not to come any closer. According to her account, she threw the knife at him rather than stabbing him directly, and maintained throughout that she acted out of fear, in self-defense. Prosecutors strongly disputed the idea that a knife thrown from any meaningful distance, Courtney reportedly claimed more than 10 feet, could have produced the injury Christian actually suffered. They relied heavily on the depth and location of the wound itself. The agreed factual statement ultimately established that the knife penetrated approximately 8 centimeters into Christian's chest, puncturing his right subclavian artery. Prosecutors argued that this depth and trajectory were far more consistent with a direct, close-range stabbing than with a knife that had simply been thrown across a room. Because the case ended in a plea rather than a trial, a jury never resolved this particular forensic dispute either. It remains, legally, an open question. One, prosecutors were prepared to argue against Courtney's version, and one, her defense was prepared to defend at trial. What happened immediately after the stabbing also became a point of dispute. Evidence and family statements indicate Courtney spoke with her mother, Deborah, around the time of the fatal event, which is one reason Deborah later became an important witness in the case. Christian's family later argued that Courtney contacted her mother, then building security, and only then called 911, and said that emergency services should have been her very first call. Courtney's defense emphasized that she did, in fact, call 911, and argued her behavior throughout was consistent with panic, not with any attempt to let Christian die. Both interpretations describe the same sequence of events, viewed through very different lenses. Miami police and Miami Fire Rescue responded after the stabbing was reported. Christian was found with a single stab wound to his chest. Courtney acknowledged at the scene that she had caused the injury. Body-worn camera footage captured her visibly distressed, speaking with officers, immediately describing what had happened as self-defense. She said her mother had been on the phone. She said Christian had thrown her against a wall and choked her, that she had tried to keep him away, and that she was covered in blood because she had tried to help him after he was injured. She reportedly asked officers whether Christian was dead and asked to go to the hospital herself. Christian was transported to Jackson Memorial Hospital. The wound, later described in the agreed factual statement as approximately 8 centimeters deep, had punctured his right subclavian artery. He died from that injury. According to his mother's later account, she had spoken with Christian just the day before. She was at work on April 4th when she received a phone call asking for her consent to donate his eyes. That is how she learned her son had died. She has described it as the darkest day of her life. His death affected his mother, his older brother, his grandmother, cousins who had been raised more like siblings, and a wide circle of extended family and friends. From the very beginning, there was no real mystery about who had caused Christian's death. Courtney admitted it at the scene. The central investigative question was never who inflicted the wound, but whether the killing was legally justified, whether Courtney had genuinely acted in self-defense, and whether her account actually matched the forensic evidence and the broader history of the relationship. Investigators spent months examining surveillance video, building records, prior security complaints, earlier police contacts, Christian's audio recordings, messages between the couple, witness accounts, medical evidence, and the specific forensic characteristics of Christian's wound. Approximately 4 months after Christian's death, Courtney was in Hawaii. On August 10, 2022, she was arrested there and subsequently returned to Florida, where she was charged with second-degree murder. She remained jailed without bond for nearly 4 years. It's worth being precise here. From that arrest until her plea in 2026, Courtney was accused of second-degree murder. She had not been convicted of it and was legally presumed innocent of that specific charge throughout the entire pretrial process. The Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office built a case portraying Christian as the primary victim of escalating domestic aggression, relying on the elevator footage, Christian's own recordings, prior complaints, allegations of earlier violent incidents, what they saw as inconsistencies in Courtney's account of throwing the knife, and the forensic evidence concerning the wound's depth. Prosecutors never disputed that the relationship itself was volatile. Their position was that Courtney's own conduct showed a clear pattern culminating in Christian's death. When the case finally resolved in 2026, State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle said prosecutors had remained focused throughout on evidence that Courtney stabbed Christian as part of a broader pattern of escalating violence. Courtney's attorneys, Frank Prieto and Sabrina Puglisi, maintained throughout the case that she was the one who had actually been abused. They argued Christian was physically larger and stronger than her, that she had been injured before, and that witnesses could corroborate specific incidents in which Christian allegedly harmed her. They pointed to police and security records they said supported her fear of him, and planned to call battered woman syndrome experts to help explain her state of mind and her perception of danger in the moments before the stabbing. Their position was that Christian lunged toward her and that she threw the knife because she genuinely believed her life was in danger. Even after Courtney pleaded guilty to manslaughter, her attorneys did not publicly abandon that self-defense narrative. They argued the negotiated 6-year sentence reflected real weaknesses they believed existed in the state's murder case. In other words, the plea resolved her criminal liability, legally and finally, but it did not create any actual agreement between prosecution and defense about every disputed event in the relationship, or about every detail of what happened in that apartment on April 3rd. Christian's family firmly rejected any portrayal of his death as justified self-defense. They maintained that Courtney had abused him, wanted meaningful accountability, and argued that Christian had stayed in the relationship because he loved her. More than anything, they wanted the public to remember Christian as a full person, not simply as the victim in a sensationalized case that had, for years, generated more headlines about Courtney's online fame than about the man who died. Family attorney Lilie James became an important public voice on their behalf throughout the process. In 2023, Christian's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit naming Courtney Clenney, the One Paraíso Condominium Association, related property management interests, and building security services as defendants. That civil case was ultimately settled in May of 2026, though the financial terms were not publicly disclosed in the court records available. A separate legal battle developed around Christian's own laptop computer. Prosecutors accused Courtney and her parents, Kim and Deborah Clenney, of unauthorized access to that device. And in February of 2024, Kim and Deborah were charged with computer-related offenses. The matter quickly became entangled with questions about attorney-client privilege. A judge eventually determined that prosecutors had improperly accessed material that should have remained privileged, and the computer-related charges against Courtney and her parents were ultimately dismissed. However, evidence gathered during that investigation continued to affect the underlying homicide case. Prosecutors also sought access to a shared iCloud account connected to Courtney and her parents, an issue that mattered largely because Deborah Clenney was considered an important witness, given that she was reportedly on the phone with Courtney around the time of the fatal stabbing. An attorney representing Courtney's parents, Jude Faxadomo, argued that prosecutors were conducting an overly broad search through deeply private family information. On March 20, 2026, Judge Andrea Wolfson agreed the original request was too broad. Prosecutors had initially sought records covering roughly 3 years, from November of 2020 through November of 2023. The court narrowed that window significantly to roughly April of 2021 through late August of 2022, and tried to limit prosecutors specifically to relevant communications rather than granting unrestricted access to the entire account. The dispute grew heated enough that Judge Wolfson warned the attorneys directly, "This is not going to turn into a telenovela," before moving the court on to other matters. By early 2026, after years in pretrial detention, the case had accumulated an enormous volume of motions and expert disputes, with both sides actively preparing for trial. Courtney's defense at one point sought to have the entire Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office disqualified from the case, arguing that the earlier privileged material issue had undermined her ability to receive a fair trial. Prosecutors opposed that request, and the case continued moving forward, with a trial at one point anticipated for late April of 2026. That trial never happened. By late July of 2026, Courtney's attorneys announced that a plea agreement had been reached. Rather than taking the second-degree murder charge before a jury, prosecutors agreed to amend it to manslaughter with a deadly weapon, a first-degree felony carrying a potential maximum sentence of 30 years. Sentencing guidelines discussed in court beforehand had cited a range of approximately 124.5 months, a little over 10 years, before the negotiated disposition replaced that figure entirely. On August 10, 2026, 4 years to the day since her arrest in Hawaii, Courtney returned to court and formally pleaded guilty. She waived her right to a trial, her right to remain silent, her right to confront and cross-examine witnesses, and the requirement that prosecutors prove their case to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. She acknowledged the plea was voluntary and pleaded guilty to manslaughter. As part of that plea, both sides agreed to a specific set of core facts: that she and Christian began dating in late 2020, that their relationship was extremely tempestuous and combative, with both of them involved in domestic violence incidents, that they moved to South Florida in January of 2022 and lived at One Paraiso, where residents and security had complained about them, and where eviction proceedings were reportedly already underway. That on April 3, 2022, emergency responders came to their apartment after a reported stabbing. That Christian suffered a single stab wound to his chest. That Courtney acknowledged causing it. That the knife penetrated approximately 8 centimeters, damaging his right subclavian artery. And that Christian was taken to Jackson Memorial Hospital, where he died from that injury. Judge Andrea Ricker-Wolfson imposed the negotiated sentence, 6 years in Florida State Prison, with credit for the nearly 4 years Courtney had already spent incarcerated since her arrest, followed by 5 years of reporting probation. That probation includes a mental health evaluation and required treatment, a substance abuse evaluation and required treatment, and a batterer's intervention requirement referenced during the plea proceedings. Based on the credit already applied, some reporting estimated Courtney might have somewhere between roughly 18 months and 2 years of actual prison time remaining, though any exact release date depends on official correctional calculations not included in the material available here. If she violates the terms of her probation, she could face substantially more prison time, up to the statutory maximum connected to her manslaughter conviction. During sentencing, prosecutors also raised a Florida law, cited in court as Florida Statute 944.512, sometimes described as Florida's version of a Son of Sam law, intended to prevent people from financially profiting from a crime they committed. The state argued Courtney should not be permitted to benefit financially from Christian's killing. Defense attorney Frank Prieto stated that the defense believed the statute was unconstitutional and reserved the right to challenge how it might be enforced against her. Christian's mother, Chio Obumseli, provided a victim impact statement that was read aloud in court by his cousin, Karen Egbuna. In it, she described years of anxiety, sleepless nights, and grief, birthdays and holidays spent without her son, and conversations the two of them would now never have. She emphasized that a plea could not bring Christian back, and that while the legal chapter of this case might finally be closing, her family's grief would not. Family members attended the hearing together, carrying photographs of Christian and wearing purple ribbons associated with domestic violence awareness. Courtney reportedly appeared visibly emotional while these statements were being read. Attorney Larry Hanfield later said that what the Obumseli family had wanted most throughout this entire process was criminal accountability, a clear acknowledgement that Courtney had caused Christian's death, and an end to years of painful uncertainty. They did not view any sentence, however long, as capable of truly compensating for the loss of Christian's life. Courtney's father, Clenney, said afterward that the process had changed how he viewed the justice system, and that he was looking forward to the day his daughter could begin rebuilding her life, when he could simply sit with her and hug her again. Her attorneys, for their part, continued to describe Courtney as a domestic violence victim, saying they still believed substantial evidence supported that claim, and that witnesses and experts had been fully prepared to testify to it at trial. In their telling, accepting the plea was a practical decision made to avoid the enormous uncertainty of a jury verdict, not an abandonment of the self-defense case they had built. As of August 2026, here is what is actually legally established. Courtney Clenney caused the stab wound that killed Christian Obumseli. Christian died from that wound. Courtney pleaded guilty to manslaughter with a deadly weapon, was adjudicated guilty, and received a 6-year prison sentence, followed by 5 years of probation. It is important to be precise about what that does and does not mean. Courtney Clenney was never convicted of second-degree murder and was never found guilty of murder by any jury. She is a convicted felon. Specifically for manslaughter with a deadly weapon, the charged prosecutors ultimately agreed to accept in place of the murder charge they had originally filed. What the guilty plea did not settle is almost as important as what it did. It did not determine, with legal finality, which partner was the primary aggressor across the full course of their relationship. It did not resolve every prior domestic violence allegation on either side. It did not conclusively establish whether Courtney's fear in the moments immediately before the stabbing was genuine. It did not settle exactly how that knife entered Christian's chest, whether thrown, as Courtney maintained, or driven indirectly, as prosecutors argued. And it will never reveal what a jury would ultimately have concluded had this case gone all the way to trial. This story should not end with OnlyFans, with social media fame, with courtroom spectacle, or with the sensational footage that dominated headlines for years. It should end with Christian. His mother wanted people to remember his compassion, his relationships, his generosity, his place within his family, as a son, a brother, a cousin, a grandson, a friend, the future he was supposed to have and never got the chance to live. The criminal case against Courtney Clenney ended finally with a negotiated guilty plea, 4 years after Christian's death. The family's grief did not end alongside it. Christian Obumseli was 27 years old. No sentence, however it was reached, could restore the birthdays, the holidays, the ordinary conversations, and the years his family had every reason to expect they would still get to share with him.
This morning, U.S. Marshals leading a coast-to-coast search for a murder suspect who hasn't been seen in more than a week. 35-year-old Kaylin Armstrong is accused of fatally shooting professional cyclist Moriah Wilson. Police say on May 11th, officers found the 25-year-old's body at this Austin home with multiple gunshot wounds.
On the night of May 11th, 2022, in Austin, Texas, a woman came home late and found her friend lying unresponsive on the bathroom floor. She called 911. The dispatcher told her to start CPR. First responders arrived within minutes, but there was nothing anyone could do. 25-year-old professional cyclist Moriah Wilson, known to almost everyone simply as Mo, had been shot 3 times. Investigators quickly realized this was not a burglary gone wrong. Her expensive racing bicycle was missing from the apartment, but it turned up almost immediately, discarded in nearby bushes. Security footage from around the neighborhood showed a dark SUV circling the area, again and again, in the hours before. A neighbor's doorbell camera had captured something else entirely: the sound of a struggle, a scream, and then gunshots. Within hours, police had reconstructed most of Mo's final evening, and the last person known to have spent time with her that night was another professional cyclist, a man named Colin Strickland. But this case would grow into something much larger than anyone expected that first night. Within days, investigators would turn their attention toward a different person entirely, a woman they came to believe was responsible. And before they could arrest her, she vanished, not just from Austin, but from the country. If a story like this deserves to be told with real care, and not just as a headline about a dramatic manhunt, stay with me and consider joining this channel for more respectful true stories. Before this becomes a story about a murder investigation, it's worth understanding who Mo Wilson actually was. She was born Moriah Wilson on May 18, 1996, in Littleton, New Hampshire, to parents Eric and Karen Wilson. She had a brother, Matthew. She grew up in Kirby, Vermont, in a family built around outdoor athletics. Both of her parents had strong backgrounds in skiing, and for a long time, Mo assumed her own future would be on the slopes, not on 2 wheels. She attended Burke Mountain Academy, a school known specifically for producing serious alpine ski racers, and became a nationally ranked junior skier, competing at a high level while also playing soccer and staying academically strong. In 2013, she placed 3rd in the downhill event at the U.S. Junior National Championships. She graduated from Burke Mountain Academy in 2014. From there, Mo went on to Dartmouth College, where she studied engineering while competing on the school's women's alpine ski team. But repeated knee injuries, including a second torn ankle, eventually changed the direction of her athletic life. Rather than walking away from competitive sport altogether, she redirected that same drive towards something new: cycling. She graduated from Dartmouth in 2019 with her engineering degree, and shortly afterward spent several weeks cycling through Europe. Later that same year, she entered a gravel race near San Francisco called the Old Growth Classic, finishing first in her age group and second overall. That result was an early sign that cycling could be far more than a way to stay active after skiing. It could be an entirely new career. She moved to California, and before becoming a full-time professional athlete, worked as a demand planner for Specialized bicycles, while continuing to race and steadily build her profile. By 2021, she was emerging as one of the most exciting women in American gravel racing, and in October of that year, she won the inaugural Big Sugar Gravel event in Bentonville, Arkansas, a victory that raised her profile even further. By early 2022, Mo's career was accelerating in a way that genuinely stood out within the sport. She won race after race: the Rock Cobbler, the Shasta Gravel Hugger, the Mid-South, the Sea Otter Classic Fuego 80-kilometer race, the Belgian Waffle Ride California. She was increasingly seen as a dominant force in gravel cycling, someone who could define the entire discipline for years to come. One cycling journalist was reportedly in the middle of writing a piece predicting she would win the 2022 Lifetime Grand Prix overall series when he learned that she had been killed. She was only 25 years old. It matters to understand who Mo was beyond her results on a bike. She wrote publicly, over the years, about commitment, community, and supporting the people around her. Years before her death, she had written about wanting to be the kind of person who helps others when they fall, who offers encouragement and inspiration rather than judgment. By 2022, part of what she described as her mission was encouraging people, especially women, to ride bicycles, stay active, and build a healthier relationship with their own bodies. One idea she returned to again and again was that when someone genuinely loves something and commits to it fully, the fear of failing becomes less important, because the process itself already has value. She believed deeply in community, and those values would later become central to how her family chose to remember her. Professional cyclist Colin Strickland was also a well-known figure within this same cycling community. He had been in an on and off relationship for several years with a woman named Kaylin Armstrong, a yoga instructor and licensed realtor. During a period when Strickland and Armstrong were apart, in late 2021, Strickland and Mo became romantically involved. Different accounts describe the length of that relationship somewhat differently, but the safest and most accurate way to describe it is this. Wilson and Strickland had a brief romantic relationship, after which they remained in contact, as friends and as colleagues within the same small cycling world. Strickland later reconciled with Armstrong. Even after that reconciliation, though, Strickland continued communicating with Mo. According to investigative material gathered later, he sometimes concealed those communications from Armstrong, reportedly deleting messages and saving Mo's contact information under a different name. Investigators eventually found evidence suggesting Armstrong had grown increasingly suspicious and increasingly jealous. One anonymous source later told investigators that Armstrong had expressed real anger about Wilson and had allegedly talked about wanting to kill her. Police also learned that Strickland had purchased firearms, including a handgun connected to Armstrong, a detail that would later become central to the case against her. According to later reporting and evidence presented at trial, Armstrong closely monitored Strickland's communications, something made easier by their intertwined personal and professional lives together. She allegedly contacted or harassed Mo directly and was accused of using digital tools, including fitness tracking data, to keep tabs on her. That kind of digital surveillance turned out to matter enormously, because the eventual case against Armstrong would be built heavily on electronic evidence, vehicle location data, surveillance footage, and carefully reconstructed movement patterns. It would be a mistake to reduce this case to a simple love triangle gone wrong. A more accurate way to frame it is this. Prosecutors would ultimately argue that jealousy and obsessive monitoring escalated into a planned killing. In May of 2022, Mo traveled to Austin, Texas, preparing to compete in Gravel Locos, a roughly 150-mile race held in nearby Hico. She stayed at the home of her friend Caitlin Cash. She was considered one of the favorites to win, and her career appeared to be entering its most promising stretch yet. On May 11th, Mo spent part of the day with Colin Strickland. They went swimming together at Deep Eddy Pool and later ate at a restaurant called Pool Burger, where surveillance cameras captured them together. Afterward, Strickland drove her back to Caitlin Cash's apartment on his motorcycle. Official records place her return at approximately 8:35 to 8:36 that evening. Electronic door lock data confirmed Mo entering the apartment. Strickland then left. Investigators would later establish, conclusively, that he was not the killer and ruled him out entirely as a suspect. This is where the case takes its crucial turn. Surveillance footage showed a black Jeep Grand Cherokee near the apartment, appearing shortly after Mo returned home. Other footage showed a dark SUV repeatedly circling the surrounding area around the time of the killing. Police would later determine that Jeep was registered to Caitlin Armstrong. According to the material gathered for this case, that vehicle appeared near the apartment only about a minute after Mo walked back inside. Mo was confronted inside Caitlin Cash's home. She was shot 3 times, 2 gunshot wounds to the head, and 1 to the chest, which passed through her heart. Evidence suggested at least one of her injuries occurred as she raised a hand. Defensively, an autopsy classified her death as a homicide. Nearby audio surveillance had captured a scream, followed by gunfire. There was no meaningful sign of robbery, and the apartment had not been ransacked. The nature of the attack strongly suggested Mo had been specifically targeted, not randomly attacked. After the shooting, her expensive racing bicycle was taken from the apartment. Police later found it discarded in nearby vegetation. That detail raised an immediate question. Why take something valuable only to abandon it just outside? It would eventually become one of the most important pieces of physical evidence in the entire case, because at trial, prosecutors introduced evidence that Caitlin Armstrong's DNA was found on that very bicycle, physically connecting her to an object removed directly from the murder scene. Later that evening, Caitlin Cash came home and found Mo on the bathroom floor. She called 911 immediately and followed the dispatcher's instructions to begin CPR while first responders were on their way. They arrived shortly before, or right around, 10 o'clock that night. Mo was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 25 years old. Police secured the residence and located shell casings. They noted the absence of any clear sign of burglary. Mo's bicycle was missing from where it should have been, and officers soon located it nearby. Investigators canvassed the surrounding properties for video, which produced 2 major pieces of evidence. Security footage showing a dark SUV moving repeatedly through the area, and nearby doorbell audio capturing the sound of the attack itself. Between these 2 pieces of evidence, police now had a fairly narrow window of time to work with. Because Colin Strickland was the last known person to spend time with Mo before her death, investigators naturally focused on him first. They approached him the following morning and told him what had happened. He appeared genuinely shocked. He described their day together honestly and acknowledged their earlier relationship. Surveillance footage corroborated much of his account, and investigators eventually confirmed he had a solid alibi, ruling him out as a suspect. One particularly important detail: Strickland was reportedly on the phone at the time of the murder, further supporting the conclusion that he could not have been the shooter. But while investigating at Strickland's home, police noticed something significant: a black Jeep Grand Cherokee, closely resembling the vehicle seen on surveillance footage near the murder scene. Strickland explained that the Jeep belonged to his live and on-and-off girlfriend, Caitlin Armstrong. That single detail turned the entire investigation in a new direction, away from Strickland and toward Armstrong. Police also asked Strickland about firearms. He told them he had purchased 2 handguns, one of which was intended for Armstrong. investigators recovered firearms from the home, and one of them, a Sig Sauer P365 associated with Armstrong, became especially significant. According to warrant material, a test-fired casing from that weapon showed a strong forensic match to a casing recovered from the murder scene. Investigators also learned that Armstrong had recently practiced shooting, further strengthening the emerging case against her. On May 12th, police discovered that Armstrong had an outstanding misdemeanor warrant, connected to a failure to pay for a Botox procedure. They brought her into custody on that warrant and used the opportunity to question her about Mo's death, confronting her with the fact that her vehicle had been seen near the murder scene. She did not offer any substantive explanation and repeatedly said she wanted to leave. There was, however, a significant legal problem. The underlying misdemeanor warrant reportedly contained an incorrect date of birth, meaning police could not legally continue holding her on it. Once that error became clear, the questioning became fully voluntary rather than custodial. Armstrong soon left. After her release, investigators kept working rapidly, examining Mo's phone, Strickland's communications, Armstrong's vehicle, surveillance footage, firearm evidence, location data, and witness statements. They learned more about the depth of Armstrong's jealousy, including an anonymous witness account describing her becoming intensely angry after learning about the connection between Strickland and Mo. They also confirmed that Strickland had hidden some of his communications with Mo from Armstrong. Piece by piece, the investigative material increasingly pointed in one direction. Additional GPS data recovered from the Jeep placed the vehicle near the crime scene, and multiple videos reportedly showed it circling the neighborhood repeatedly, something prosecutors would later argue demonstrated planning and surveillance rather than mere coincidence. At trial, the defense would challenge whether anyone could actually prove Armstrong herself had been behind the wheel, a distinction worth keeping in mind as this story moves toward the courtroom. After police questioning, Armstrong sold the black Jeep, generating cash in the process. Investigators later viewed this, along with her broader financial and travel behavior, as part of a pattern suggesting she was preparing to leave. Selling one of the most important physical objects connecting her to the investigation, right after being questioned about it, only deepened suspicion. According to reporting on the case, Armstrong left Austin on May 14th. Airport surveillance later captured her at Austin Bergstrom International Airport, boarding a flight to New York, where her sister lived. The U.S. Marshal Service and local authorities began trying to trace where she had gone from there. By May 17th, investigators believed they had developed enough evidence to move forward, and a warrant was issued for Kaylin Armstrong's arrest on a charge of first-degree murder. But by that point, she was already gone. What had begun as a homicide investigation had transformed into a fugitive manhunt. Investigators contacted Armstrong's sister and learned that her passport was missing. The sister reportedly said she had not knowingly given it to Kaylin. When officials checked international travel records under the sister's identity, they discovered the passport had in fact been used, and that Armstrong had already left the United States entirely. Her destination was Costa Rica. The U.S. Marshal Service became deeply involved in the search from this point forward. Deputy Marshals Amir Perez and Damian Fernandez followed the trail to Costa Rica, initially focusing their search around the capital, San Jose. But Armstrong was no longer easy to recognize. Investigators learned she had cut her hair, dyed it brown, used different names, and otherwise altered her appearance. According to source material compiled on the case, she had also used multiple aliases and undergone cosmetic surgery while in the country. Investigators eventually developed information suggesting Armstrong had relocated to Santa Teresa, a small beach town popular with travelers, surfers, and yoga practitioners. She was reportedly staying in hostels and had been seeking work connected to yoga instruction. The constant flow of tourists in and out of a town like that made locating one specific person extremely difficult. Weeks passed, and the search appeared, at times, close to stalling entirely. Eventually, the marshals tried an unusual strategy. Because Armstrong was a trained yoga instructor, They placed an advertisement on a local Facebook page seeking a yoga teacher. At first, nothing came of it. Then, someone responded. Around the same time, authorities had narrowed their focus to a particular hostel where Armstrong might be staying, and local tourism police assisted with surveillance in the area. Eventually, a woman matching Armstrong's altered appearance came into view. One marshal later said it was ultimately her eyes that convinced him they had finally found the right person. After 43 days as a fugitive, Kaylin Armstrong was captured in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica, on June 29, 2022. Her appearance had changed substantially. She had a bandage on her nose, and her face looked noticeably different than it had before she fled. A receipt later recovered at the hostel reportedly confirmed she had undergone cosmetic surgery. According to reporting on the case, when marshals had first begun searching Santa Teresa, Armstrong may actually have still been in San Jose, undergoing that very procedure. She had come remarkably close to remaining hidden. Armstrong was returned to Texas and formally arraigned on July 21, 2022. She pleaded not guilty. Bond was set at $3.5 million, and she remained in custody as she awaited trial. In the months that followed, her attorneys challenged evidence obtained during her earlier police questioning, arguing her rights had been violated. That effort to suppress the interrogation evidence ultimately failed. A separate federal charge related to unlawful flight was provisionally dismissed, but the core murder prosecution continued moving forward. Then, weeks before trial, on October 12, 2023, while being transported outside the jail for a medical appointment, Armstrong escaped from the officers escorting her and ran. She did not get far. Authorities recaptured her after a brief pursuit, and an escape-related charge stemming from the incident was later dropped. It was a striking moment within an already extraordinary case. She had already fled one country's murder investigation, disappeared internationally, and been captured on a Costa Rican beach town. Now facing trial, she had tried to run again. Armstrong's murder trial began in Austin on October 30, 2023. The prosecution argued that jealousy had escalated into careful planning, and ultimately, Murder the State's case did not depend on a single witness testifying that they had watched Armstrong pull the trigger. Instead, prosecutors built their case as a chain of connected evidence. They presented the black Jeep, captured on surveillance near Mo's residence. They presented GPS data supporting the vehicle's presence near the crime scene, and video reportedly showing it circling the neighborhood repeatedly before the killing. They presented the Sig Sauer P365 connected to Armstrong, and the casing evidence significantly matching what had been recovered at the scene. They presented witness testimony describing Armstrong's anger and alleged prior threats concerning Mo, along with evidence suggesting she had digitally monitored both Strickland and Mo. They presented Armstrong's own Dina, found on Mo's bicycle, an object removed from the apartment and discarded nearby after the murder. And they presented her flight from the area and ultimately from the country, along with her use of a stolen identity, aliases, and a deliberately altered appearance. The defense, for its part, emphasized what the state's case did not include: a traditional eyewitness. No camera had captured Armstrong physically entering the apartment. No one testified to personally seeing her shoot Mo. The defense questioned whether prosecutors could actually prove Armstrong herself had been driving the Jeep on the night in question, and challenged parts of the broader forensic and investigative process, pointing to unidentified Dina recovered from parts of the scene, and raising questions about samples that were not tested or emphasized. The defense also attempted to redirect attention back toward Colin Strickland, arguing investigators had focused on Armstrong too quickly, and they specifically warned jurors not to treat her flight, on its own, as proof that she had committed murder. In closing, prosecutors argued the overall timeline was simply too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Mo returned to the apartment. Armstrong's Jeep appeared in the area almost immediately afterward. Gunfire followed. Mo's bicycle was removed from the scene, and Armstrong's own Dina later turned up on it. The suspected murder weapon was tied directly to Armstrong. Her vehicle and her digital footprint placed her in the area. And then, rather than staying to answer further questions, she left the country entirely and changed her identity and her appearance. The state argued this was, in totality, a premeditated killing, driven by jealousy. After a trial that included testimony from more than 40 witnesses, the case went to the jury on November 16, 2023. After roughly 2 hours of deliberation, they returned their verdict. Kaylin Armstrong was found guilty of murder. The verdict brought an end to more than a year and a half of criminal investigation, an international manhunt, extensive pretrial litigation, and a lengthy courtroom process. The following day, November 17th, Armstrong was formally sentenced. The court imposed 90 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 30 years. A $10,000 fine was also imposed. Wilson's family and her friend Caitlin Cash addressed the court, speaking to the emotional toll the murder had caused. Cash spoke about the guilt she continued to carry, even though there was nothing she could have done, simply for not arriving home sooner that night. Mo's mother described the killing as both selfish and cowardly, and emphasized that Armstrong had destroyed far more than one family. The family also made a point of stressing that although Mo's physical life had been taken from her, her legacy remained entirely beyond Armstrong's reach. Armstrong later challenged her conviction. Her appeal for a new trial was denied, and her murder conviction remained firmly in place. She is currently incarcerated at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Texas. The criminal case, though, was not the final legal chapter. On May 6, 2024, Mo's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Armstrong, seeking compensation for their loss, and specifically intended to prevent Armstrong from ever financially benefiting from the crime. On June 17, 2024, a judge ordered Armstrong to pay the Wilson family $15 million. According to later reporting, Armstrong transferred or emptied financial assets shortly after that wrongful death lawsuit was filed, and the Wilson family subsequently pursued additional legal claims involving alleged fraudulent transfers connected to members of Armstrong's family and to Colin Strickland himself. In the immediate aftermath of Mo's death, the cycling community reacted with genuine, widespread grief. Fellow athletes described her as unusually talented, energetic, generous, and inspiring. Cyclist Peter Stetina spoke about the way she pushed the people racing around her to work harder, simply by being there. Rebecca Rush described her as someone who was full of light and full of laughter. The hashtag #RideLikeMo spread quickly among cyclists around the country, and her family made clear from the very beginning that they wanted her remembered for her accomplishments, her kindness, her determination, and her genuine love of sport, rather than solely for the horrific way her life ended. Eventually, Mo's family created the Moriah Wilson Foundation, built directly around the values she had spent years writing and talking about: supporting young people, promoting cycling and outdoor activity, building community, and helping others find confidence and strength through sport. The case went on to receive significant media attention. In 2024, Lifetime released a film titled Yoga Teacher Killer: The Caitlin Armstrong Story. Later, a documentary called The Truth and Tragedy of Moriah Wilson premiered at South by Southwest in March of 2026 and was released on Netflix the following month, bringing renewed public attention to the case years after the murder itself. This story, though, should not end with Caitlin Armstrong. It should end with Moriah Wilson. At 25, she had only recently committed herself fully to professional cycling and had already become one of the most exciting gravel racers anywhere in the United States. She had serious engineering training behind her. She had once been an elite competitive skier, and when injury took that path away from her, she rebuilt an entirely new athletic career almost from scratch. She believed deeply in commitment, in lifting other people up, and in helping women and female athletes feel genuinely confident in their own bodies. She wanted more people, especially more women, to get outside, ride bikes, and experience that same sense of freedom and strength that sport had given her. Her family built an entire foundation around exactly those values after she was gone. Her murder interrupted a career that was still accelerating, faster than almost anyone in her sport had expected. It cut short relationships, ambitions, and an entire future that was only just beginning to take shape. But it did not erase who she had already become. The crime explains how Mo Wilson died. It should never be allowed to define who she was. Just before midnight, a Sanford police officer is doing what officers do most nights, driving the same streets, watching for anything out of place. That's when the headlights catch it. A gray Nissan, parked at Coastline Park, engine still running. Inside, a young woman isn't moving. Something about this scene doesn't sit right immediately. The windows are up, all except the driver's side. One of the front doors is unlocked. The seats reclined, like she'd leaned back to rest, or maybe like someone else had put her that way. There's blood near the driver's door. And yet, her purse is still there. Her wallet's untouched. A purple phone sits inside, undisturbed, outside, near the back of the car. Officers find a single shell casing. 9mm. This isn't a robbery. Whatever happened here, it wasn't about taking something from her. Her license tells them who she is. 18-year-old Kaylin Fiengo. And then comes the detail that changes everything about how this case will be understood. Kaylin is pregnant. About 13 weeks along. This isn't one death investigators are looking at tonight. It's two. The question that will drive the next 3 years starts right here, in this parking lot, under these streetlights. Who brought Kaylin to this park, and why? If a case like this deserves to be told with care, rather than rushed through for shock value, stick around, and consider subscribing for more respectful true stories. Before any of this, before the park, before the gunshot, Kaylin was just 18, already a mother to a young son, pregnant again, and talking about it openly with the people closest to her. She'd gone in for an ultrasound. She was planning to keep this baby, even though, according to prosecutors, someone in her life was pushing hard for the opposite. At least one friend had been worried enough that night to try talking her out of the plan she had. This wasn't a young woman stumbling blindly into danger. She had people around her who knew what was going on, who were paying attention, who tried to help. Beyond that, the record is thin. No details here about her childhood, her family beyond her friend circle, her schooling, her work. So this story stays with what's actually known. An 18-year-old, pregnant, trying to navigate something complicated, on what would turn out to be the last night of her life. That absence of biographical detail says something on its own. A lot of true crime stories lean on childhood photos, old yearbook quotes, a full arc of who someone was before the tragedy. This one can't do that. Not honestly. What's left instead is simpler, and maybe more powerful. A portrait built entirely out of the last weeks of her life, out of who she was trying to protect, and what she was trying to build. The man at the center of what happened next is Donovan Faison. By his own account to police, he and Kaylin met on Instagram. He described it as casual, mostly physical, nothing serious. Messages through direct message, he said. No phone numbers exchanged, only a handful of in-person meetings. Here's the complication. Donovan wasn't single. He'd been with another woman for close to 2 years by that point, and that relationship had just produced a baby, only about 2 weeks old at the time detectives sat down with him. So picture where Donovan stood, a newborn at home, a girlfriend who already knew, or at least strongly suspected, he'd been unfaithful, and now Kaylin telling him she was carrying a second child, one she said was his. That's not automatically a motive for murder. People navigate messy situations like this all the time without anyone getting hurt. But prosecutors would eventually argue that this particular mix, The pressure, the timing, the anger pushed Donovan somewhere far darker than an ordinary argument. Around mid-September, according to a friend later interviewed by police, Kaylin told Donovan she was pregnant. She reportedly showed him proof, a photo of 2 positive tests. His first move, according to the investigative account, was to accuse her of lying. Then came one word, in all caps, with several exclamation points behind it. Abortion. That word would end up carrying enormous weight in how the state eventually explained this entire case. Not just that Donovan knew about the pregnancy, but that he wanted it gone. Kaylin said no. Friends later told investigators Donovan didn't let it go. One friend, named in case materials as Miramar, said Kaylin described him repeatedly pushing the subject, again and again. So here's the conflict, laid bare. Kaylin wanted to keep this baby. Donovan, according to the state, wanted it ended. And underneath all of it, he was trying to hold together a relationship with a woman who already suspected the worst about him. Not long before she died, Kaylin got that ultrasound. She told her friends. She also reportedly told Donovan's girlfriend, a woman named Sierra, that she was pregnant. Donovan's reaction to receiving an ultrasound image, according to prosecutors, was anger. And here's where the case takes on a genuinely haunting detail. An ultrasound image later turned up near the crime scene, just feet from where Kaylin was found. Sit with that for a second. The child prosecutors say Donovan wanted eliminated was represented, physically, by an image found almost within reach of where both mother and child died. 3 days before the murder, investigators found messages between Donovan and a friend identified only as Woody. Donovan, upset after seeing an image tied to the pregnancy, allegedly wrote that Kaylin needed to get cropped out. He reportedly swore on his brother's grave that he'd crop her out, that he wouldn't hold back. Around this same time, investigators say Donovan got so angry he punched a hole straight through a wall in his home. When police later searched that residence, they reportedly found a hole matching that account. These messages became some of the strongest evidence prosecutors had for premeditation. It's worth pausing here to be exact about what this evidence was and wasn't. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't him saying in plain words that he intended to kill her. It was an angry message to a friend, slang that prosecutors read as something far more sinister than ordinary venting. What those words actually meant would ultimately be for a jury to decide, not investigators, not this documentary. One day before Kaylin died, another piece of digital evidence surfaces. She sent a friend named Simone a screenshot, a missed message from an Instagram account called Global Kids. Investigators traced that account back to Donovan. The message read, "Just want to talk." Kaylin's reply, "We can talk. I'm just not arguing with you." That small exchange matters, because Donovan would later tell police the two of them hadn't really been in touch recently. Her phone told a different story. On the day she died, Kaylin stayed in contact with friends as usual. Simone later said their last conversation was around 7-8 that evening. According to Simone, Kaylin had 2 things on the schedule that night, each tied to a different man. First, dropping off her son. After that, meeting Donovan, the man her friends believed was the father of the baby she was carrying. Simone didn't love the plan. She suggested Kaylin just call him instead of meeting in person. Another friend, spoken to roughly a week and a half later, confirmed the same thing. Kaylin had said she was going to meet Donovan that night. More than one person, independently, told investigators the exact same thing. Prosecutors would later argue that Donovan talked Kaylin into meeting him specifically at Coastline Park. She didn't end up there randomly. She drove there. And she was found there, dead, inside her own car. There's no complete minute-by-minute reconstruction available of exactly how that meeting unfolded, so this story won't invent one. What the state argued was straightforward. Kaylin met Donovan at that park, and she was shot in the head there, killing her and her unborn child. The scene itself argued against robbery. Nothing was missing. Purse, wallet, phone, all still there. Whatever explanation fit this, taking her things wasn't it. During the penalty phase, prosecutor Stuart Stone would call it execution style and ask jurors to weigh just how cold, how calculated, how premeditated this killing really was. Back at the scene that night, officers cataloged everything. Blood by the rear door, blood on the outside of the driver's door. Kaylin in the driver's seat, reclined, a small purse on the passenger floor. That purple phone. A shell casing outside, near the back of the car. Once they identified her through her license, this stopped being a possible robbery and became, almost immediately, a homicide investigation. Around 1 in the morning, Kaylin's friend Simone showed up. She'd had a feeling something was wrong. She didn't yet know what police had actually found. What she told them gave investigators their first real lead. Kaylin was about 13 weeks pregnant. Donovan was believed to be the father. She'd planned to meet him that night, and Simone had tried to talk her out of doing it in person. Just like that, Donovan's name was in the investigation. Over the following days, detectives dug into Kaylin's digital life, her phone, her Instagram, her iCloud, screenshots she'd saved, conversations about the pregnancy. The Global Kids account became an important thread once it was tied back to Donovan. 5 days after Kaylin died, detectives showed up at Donovan's apartment. He seemed to already know why. Asked what he thought this was about, he said people had been mentioning his name in connection with, in his words, the girl found in the park. This first conversation was voluntary. No arrest. Detectives just wanted to hear his side. He admitted knowing Kaylin, described things as casual and physical, said they'd met on Instagram, never traded numbers, only saw each other in person a couple times. He mentioned his girlfriend, said she'd found out about Kaylin, said it caused real problems at home. He downplayed almost everything about the relationship. Asked when he'd last talked to or seen Kaylin, his answers shifted around. Maybe a couple weeks back, maybe a month, possibly early October. He gave the impression things had ended quietly, well before November. That impression didn't survive contact with the evidence. Asked if he knew she was pregnant, he said yes, but questioned whether it was his, claiming Kaylin had given him mixed signals on that herself. He said he wasn't particularly bothered by any of it. Asked if he'd said anything about the pregnancy, he admitted mentioning abortion, but brushed past how serious that conversation actually was. His basic position, if she had the baby, she had the baby. That casual framing didn't match up at all with the messages prosecutors would later bring into court. Asked directly about Coastline Park, Donovan denied any plan to meet Kaylin there. No meeting, he said. Hadn't seen her that night. Hadn't been to that park since he was a kid. Direct contradiction. Kaylin's friends were telling police she planned to meet him. He was telling police there was never any meeting to begin with. He gave police an alibi, work earlier that day, then his mother's house until around 8 or 8:30, then home, where he stayed with the newborn while his girlfriend went out. He said his mother and girlfriend could back him up. There's no complete record here of how prosecutors tested that alibi at trial, so this documentary won't fill that gap in. Asked about guns, he said he didn't have any, that the closest thing he'd ever owned was a BB gun, and that his girlfriend didn't have weapons either. There's nothing in the available material confirming police ever recovered and traced a specific murder weapon back to him, so that stays an open point here too. One of the more telling moments in that interview came when detectives asked to see his recent messages with Kaylin. He couldn't produce any. Deleted, he said, partly because of the tension they'd caused with his girlfriend. No photos of Kaylin on his phone either, he claimed. Detectives told him plainly they had Kaylin's phone. They could see her side of everything, independent of anything he said. Even knowing that, he kept insisting they wouldn't find recent conversations between them. They did. As detectives kept working, the contradictions piled up. He said contact ended by early October. Records showed messages much closer to the night she died. He said no meeting was planned. Multiple friends said otherwise. He downplayed his reaction to the pregnancy. The messages told a much angrier story. About a week and a half after the murder, another close friend of Kaylin's confirmed the same basic facts. That Kaylin told Donovan in September the baby was his, that he responded by pushing abortion, and that on the day she died, she'd said she was going to see him. In December, detectives pulled data from Donovan's own phone and found the November 8th messages to Woody. The cropped-out language. The reference to his brother's grave. Investigators connected that anger directly to the hole in his wall. To prosecutors, none of this read as throwaway words. It read as evidence of a mindset, formed just days before Kaylin was killed. Even with all of this, there was no immediate arrest. Nearly 10 months passed. This case didn't move in a straight line from body to boyfriend to arrest. Investigators kept grinding, reviewing digital records, re-interviewing witnesses, checking Donovan's own statements against what the evidence actually showed, building towards something they believed could prove not just involvement, but premeditation. For Kaylin's family and friends, that stretch of nearly a year must have been its own kind of torment. They already believed, in their own minds, who was responsible. But belief isn't proof, and prosecutors needed something strong enough to convince 12 strangers, beyond a reasonable doubt, of exactly what happened inside that park. Building a case like that takes time no one waiting for answers ever wants to give it. On August 29, 2023, Donovan Faison was arrested. Initially, 2 felony homicide counts, one for Kaylin, one for her unborn child. Those charges would later be restructured around something far more serious, first-degree premeditated murder. The state's theory, once it all came together, followed a clean line. Donovan was involved with Kaylin while living with someone else. Kaylin got pregnant, told him it was his. He wanted it terminated. She said no. That refusal, prosecutors argued, threatened to blow up his household right after the birth of his own newborn. His anger built. He talked about cropping her out. Then, according to the state, he reached back out, arranged to meet her at Coastline Park, and shot her there. Her untouched belongings ruled out robbery, prosecutors argued, and his own statements, once checked against the digital record, simply didn't hold up. Almost 3 years after Kaylin died, in October 2025, Donovan stood trial in Seminole County. 23 years old by then. Prosecutors built their case around everything they'd spent years assembling. The pregnancy, the pressure to end it, the cropped-out messages, the planned meeting, the contradictions in his police interview, the physical facts of the scene. There's no complete record here of the defense's case at trial. So this story won't reconstruct arguments that weren't supplied. What can be said is that this wasn't a case built on a single dramatic piece of evidence. It was built on accumulation, a message here, a screenshot there, a friend's account, a contradiction between what Donovan told police and what his own phone eventually gave up. Whether that accumulation was enough was, in the end, exactly the question 12 jurors in Seminole County were asked to answer. On October 28, 2025, the jury came back. Guilty, first-degree premeditated murder with a firearm, killing an unborn child by injury to the mother, burglary of a conveyance involving assault or battery with a firearm, inflicting death. Now finally, the word applies plainly. Donovan Faison was convicted. The case moved into its penalty phase. Prosecutors argued this had been cold, calculated, premeditated, and pushed for the harshest sentence available. Stuart Stone called it, again, execution style. On October 30th, the jury voted. 11 for death, 1 against. They recommended it. That's not a rubber stamp. Florida requires jurors to weigh this separately from guilt, before a judge can even consider the harshest possible sentence. 11 of 12 looked at this case and concluded it warranted exactly that. On December 5, 2025, a judge formally sentenced Donovan Faison to death. Records later placed him at Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. A lot about this case still isn't public, and probably never will be. The exact time she was shot, the full autopsy, whether the actual murder weapon was ever recovered, the complete picture of cell tower or surveillance data, the full defense strategy at trial. None of that's here, and none of it should be guessed at. What is established, clearly, legally, is this. A jury heard the evidence. They convicted Donovan Faison of killing Kaylin Fiengo and her unborn child. They recommended death, nearly unanimously. A judge imposed that sentence. This story doesn't end with Donovan. It ends with an 18-year-old who already had one child and was carrying another, who told her friends what was happening right up until her last hours, who'd gone in for an ultrasound, who was planning to raise that child no matter what pressure she was under to do otherwise. She never got to raise that baby, never got to watch her son grow up, never got to see what her own life could have become. What she left behind mattered more than anyone could have guessed that first night. Her messages, her conversations with friends, the screenshots she'd saved, the ultrasound she carried with her. Those pieces, painstakingly assembled over almost 3 years, became the foundation of a case a jury found proven, beyond a reasonable doubt. Her son will grow up without her, pieced together for him one day through photographs, through the people who loved her, and through a court record built to answer one question. Who took his mother from him, and why? Her unborn child never had a name beyond that ultrasound image, the one that ended up sitting in a case file, feet from where they both died. This started with an 18-year-old alone in a running car, in a quiet park. It ended 3 years later, with 12 people deciding that the words sent before her death weren't empty threats. They were, the jury found, part of a plan that cost 2 lives. Kaylin Fiengo was 18. A mother, about to be one again. And she deserved so much more than the ending this case gave her. A phone buzzes in Ashley Bocanegra's hand. The number is one she knows well. The messages sound exactly like him. "Where you at? I need to see you. I want you here so bad." She has no reason to doubt it. This is his phone. His words. His voice, at least on the screen. What Ashley doesn't know, in that moment, is that the man she loves is asleep, and has been for hours. Someone else is holding his phone. Someone else is typing. By the time Ashley realizes the truth, it will already be too late. This is August 11th, 2022 in Beaufort, Georgia, and the woman sending those messages isn't Daniel Gonzalez. It's his fiancée, Antonetta Stevens, and according to investigators, she had help. Ashley got ready. She believed him. And she drove straight into what prosecutors would later call a planned ambush. Waiting for her at an apartment complex were Antonetta and Daniel's 17-year-old sister, Janine. What happened next wasn't just witnessed. It was filmed, allegedly by one of the attackers themselves, on a phone that would later capture a threat prosecutors say was repeated more than once. "I will murder you." Ashley survived long enough to walk away from that apartment complex under her own power. She wouldn't survive the day. If a case like this deserves to be handled with real care, rather than treated as just another shocking headline, stay with me. And consider joining this channel for more respectful true stories. Ashley Bocanegra was born on November 18th, 1991, in New York City. She grew up there before eventually making her way south to Georgia, a move her family says she made for one simple reason. She wanted something better, for herself and for her young son. By the time she died, Ashley had a 7-year-old boy. Some reporting names Daniel Gonzalez as his father, though other accounts describe Daniel simply as Ashley's partner at the time. Given that inconsistency, the fairest way to put it is this. Ashley was raising a young son, and Daniel Gonzalez was part of her life in the months leading up to her death. Those who knew Ashley described someone genuinely full of life. Happy, caring, hardworking, independent, ambitious. The kind of person who could walk into a room and change its entire energy. A co-worker named Will Clark put it simply, she was a good worker and a good person. Over and over, her family has come back to the same point, that Ashley moved to Georgia, chasing something better for her and for her son. She found work at Floor & Decor and eventually became a manager there. Among the people she supervised was Daniel Gonzalez. Somewhere along the way, according to the reporting available, their working relationship turned into something more. There was just one problem. Daniel wasn't single. He'd been with Antonetta Stevens for roughly 5 years by that point. They lived together as a couple, and later reporting indicates they had children together as well. Antonetta was 27, based in Buford, and by August of 2022, the relationship she'd built with Daniel over half a decade was already showing serious strain, largely because she'd learned about Ashley. Meanwhile, Daniel's younger sister, 17-year-old Janine, had come down from Buffalo, New York, to spend time in Georgia. Janine and Antonetta were close enough that Janine would later tell police Antonetta felt more like an actual sister to her than Daniel ever felt like a brother. At some point, Daniel told his sister the truth, that he was seeing someone else. That someone was Ashley. Janine, in turn, told Antonetta. That single conversation seems to have poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning. The day before the attack, according to Janine's later account, she and Antonetta were walking toward a convenience store when they spotted Daniel, out in public, walking with Ashley. For Antonetta, it confirmed everything she'd already suspected. Janine remembered her anger boiling over, partly because Daniel had told them he couldn't get away from work that day, and yet there he was. What followed, based on the interview material, was a serious blow-up between Antonetta and Daniel. Antonetta reportedly started packing her things. She later told police she'd believed in a future with Daniel, one he'd apparently just shattered, and that she felt humiliated and heartbroken. Those feelings would eventually become part of her own explanation for what happened next. But investigators reached a very different conclusion about how Ashley actually ended up at that apartment complex. They didn't believe she showed up on her own. They believed she was lured there. At the center of that theory is Daniel's cell phone. According to Daniel himself, Antonetta took it while he slept and used it to message Ashley, posing as him the entire time. The goal, as investigators pieced it together, was simple: convince Ashley that Daniel urgently needed to see her. Detectives eventually recovered those messages. "Where you at? I need to see you. I want you here so bad. I got kicked out. Can you come meet me? Meet me in the back. I don't want no problems." Ashley answered. She said she was getting ready. She said she'd come. That evidence turned out to be enormous, because it directly contradicted what Antonetta would later tell police, that Ashley had simply shown up at her apartment, uninvited and unexpected. This wasn't two women crossing paths by chance and clashing. According to investigators, Ashley believed she was answering a call from someone she trusted. Instead, two people were waiting for her, and neither of them was Daniel. The attack happened near the 2900 block of Buford Drive, at an apartment complex in Beaufort, Gwinnett County, later identified in reporting as Preston Hills at Mill Creek, not far from Interstate 85. According to Gwinnett County Police, it all unfolded around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Ashley arrived, walking straight into a trap built entirely out of a handful of text messages. Video evidence later showed Antonetta confronting her almost immediately. "That was me," she reportedly told Ashley. "You know he didn't text you that, right?" In that instant, the deception was exposed. And the confrontation exploded into violence almost as fast. What followed, based on the material available, involved repeated punching, kicking, hair-pulling, and dragging. The footage that later surfaced has been described as extremely graphic. Prosecutor Don Geary would later insist this wasn't some mutual fight between two combatants. He said the video showed Ashley mostly trying to shield herself, arms raised to block blow after blow, never striking back the way someone would in an actual two-sided confrontation. His characterization was blunt. This was a beating. The recording allegedly captured Antonetta's voice throughout, repeating threats. "I will murder you," said according to court reporting more than once. "Are you ready to die. I could do worse. Those words would carry enormous weight later, once this stopped being an assault case and became something far more serious. Janine had her phone out for much of it, recording. That footage would eventually become one of the most damning pieces of evidence against both of them. But Janine wasn't simply holding a camera from the sidelines. According to police and her own later admissions, she joined in physically. She told detectives she got a few licks in. She admitted to hitting Ashley. She acknowledged pulling her hair. Police say she kicked her as well, and at a later hearing, authorities specifically stated she'd kicked Ashley roughly 3 times in the side. One of the most striking pieces of evidence came from Ashley herself, from a message she reportedly sent Daniel afterward. In it, she said she'd been relatively okay until his sister kicked her in the chest and back. That single message would later become central to proving Janine's role went far beyond simply being present. At some point during the chaos, Ashley's phone was taken. Janine later insisted it wasn't stolen for good, just taken, and eventually handed back. Police, however, treated the taking of that phone as a robbery, and it became a formal charge against both women. Daniel, meanwhile, had been asleep through at least part of what was happening. He says he woke to the sound of arguing outside, and when he came out, he found Ashley badly hurt, covered in blood. Later reporting says he was visibly shocked. According to his account, Antonetta tried to go after Ashley again, even after everything. Daniel stepped in and pulled the two of them apart. Police later noted scratches on his shoulders and back, injuries they believed came from that attempt to separate the fight. Despite everything that had just happened, Ashley managed to walk away from that apartment complex. She wasn't pronounced dead there. That detail matters enormously to how this story unfolds. The violence had stopped. Ashley was still breathing. But the damage inside her body was already far worse than anyone realized. Because this had happened in broad daylight, in a residential complex full of people. Someone called 911, and police arrived. They found Antonetta at the apartment. Her first version of events centered on Ashley coming to her, uninvited, because of her involvement with Daniel. She told officers she was heartbroken over the affair and had fought Ashley out of anger. At one point, she more or less admitted she'd been waiting for Ashley and had fought her when she arrived. What she left out, at least initially, was any mention of the fake messages. She also tried to take sole responsibility for what happened, downplaying Janine's role, telling officers Janine had been present, but suggesting she hadn't actually taken part in the violence. That story wouldn't survive contact with the video, or with Janine's own words. Ashley eventually made it to a hospital, either driven by Daniel or arriving on her own, depending on which account you read. Before her condition worsened, she reportedly spoke with police herself and gave an account that had nothing to do with Antonetta or Daniel at all. She said she'd been waiting for an Uber when 2 women she didn't know attacked her, out of nowhere. Possibly mistaken identity. She reportedly chose not to press charges. Investigators would eventually realize none of that matched the evidence. Why Ashley told that version of events isn't something this material explains, and this documentary won't guess at her reasons. What is clear is that investigators ultimately determined she hadn't disclosed what had actually happened, or who was actually responsible. Her condition deteriorated fast. Her sister, Jessica Roche, later described just how serious things had become: difficulty breathing, an intubation, an eventual transfer to another facility because of how critical she was. Jessica said doctors found fractured ribs, serious internal injuries, and damage to her liver. Later, more detailed medical reporting pointed to something more specific behind the fatal bleeding: a ruptured adrenal gland, an injury typically associated with forces comparable to a severe car crash. That single detail says everything about how brutal this beating actually was. Different accounts describe her injuries slightly differently: ribs and liver in one telling, internal bleeding in the lungs in another, the ruptured adrenal gland in the most detailed medical reporting. Rather than merging all of that into a single tidy medical conclusion, the most accurate description is this: Ashley suffered catastrophic blunt force trauma and internal bleeding, and later, autopsy-based reporting specifically pointed to a ruptured adrenal gland as a major factor in her fatal hemorrhage. Later that same day, August 11th, 2022, Ashley Bocanegra died. She was 30 years old. An assault investigation instantly became a homicide case. Detectives went back to Antonetta and Daniel's apartment, this time to deliver news no one wants to deliver. Body camera footage captured the exact moment Antonetta heard it. "She died," she said, sounding stunned. Then, something close to, "I wasn't going to kill anybody. I'm not that person." She insisted she was shocked, that killing Ashley had never been the plan. She also told detectives she was overwhelmed, mentioned struggling with bipolar depression, and talked about the collapse of her relationship with Daniel and her own sense of betrayal. Those are her words, offered in the moment she learned a woman was dead. They explain how she was feeling. They don't establish guilt or innocence on their own, and they don't excuse anything that had already happened. Detectives also sat down with Daniel, who still didn't know Ashley had died. He confirmed knowing her and talked through their relationship, hedging at first about exactly what it was before eventually acknowledging the truth. It was in that same conversation that one of the case's biggest breakthroughs happened. Daniel told investigators that Antonetta had taken his phone while he slept and used it to message Ashley, pretending to be him. He handed his phone over. Detectives found the exchange. And suddenly, the picture was clear. Ashley hadn't wandered into that apartment complex by accident. She'd been invited there, deliberately, through messages built to deceive her. Eventually, detectives told Daniel that Ashley had died. What followed, based on the footage, was raw and immediate. He reportedly kept asking officers to stop joking, again and again, until the reality finally landed. Antonetta was taken in for formal questioning. At some point, she asked for an attorney, which brought the substantive interrogation to a halt. But before that happened, she stuck to a version of events that left out any real planning, still insisting Ashley had come looking for Daniel, still framing the whole thing as a fight rather than a setup. Janine, 17, was brought in as well. While she waited, cameras caught her talking casually, singing to herself, complaining about being tired, occasionally laughing. Detectives later remarked on just how relaxed she seemed. When questioning started, detectives kept things conversational at first, simply asking her to walk them through what had happened. She laid out the backstory. Daniel had been cheating. She and Antonetta were close. She felt loyal to her. She was the one who'd told Antonetta about Ashley in the first place, and things escalated fast once they saw Daniel and Ashley together in public. At one point, she described her reasoning through what she called girl code. As the conversation continued, Janine admitted that she and Antonetta had actually talked, beforehand, about fighting Ashley. Detectives pushed further, asking whether Ashley had any idea what she was walking into. Eventually, Janine admitted she hadn't. She'd been deceived. Investigators told her plainly they already knew about the phone. Janine more or less confirmed it, that the messages had been designed to get Ashley there. One detective put it bluntly, telling her they'd finessed Ashley into showing up. At first, Janine downplayed her own involvement. Eventually, though, she admitted to hitting Ashley and to pulling her hair. Combined with other evidence pointing to kicks as well, the picture that emerged was one of active participation, not passive presence. When detectives told her that Ashley's death was a direct result of the attack, Janine's reaction included the words, "This make me feel like I'm going to hell." She called the whole thing crazy. One of the more unsettling parts of that interrogation footage is Janine's laughter scattered throughout. Investigators later said her demeanor didn't match the remorse they expected to see. It's the kind of detail that understandably grabbed headlines. But it deserves caution here. How someone behaves under stress, confusion, or fear isn't proof of anything about intent or guilt, not by itself. What actually mattered, legally, was her participation, her own admissions, the video, the messages, and the medical evidence. Not her tone of voice in an interview room. Eventually, Investigators searched both women's phones, hoping one held a recording of the attack. What they found, one prosecutor later called a gold mine. Video recovered from Janine's phone reportedly captured key portions of the assault, giving investigators, and eventually the courts, a view of the confrontation from the attacker's own perspective. Prosecutor Don Geary later explained that footage like this essentially turns jurors into witnesses. The recording reportedly showed Ashley's arrival, Antonetta admitting to the fake messages, the assault beginning, threats repeated, Ashley trying to defend herself, Janine joining in, the phone being taken, and how the two of them behaved during and after everything. The threat "I will murder you" was reportedly repeated multiple times on that recording. Police also testified to hearing "Are you ready to die?" and "I could do worse." Those statements later helped prosecutors argue this wasn't spontaneous, and it wasn't minor. Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez were arrested. The initial charges, aggravated battery, robbery, and felony murder. Both were held without bond in those early stages. Under the prosecution's early legal theory, Ashley's death resulted from serious criminal conduct that occurred during an assault and a robbery. The taking of her phone tied directly to that robbery charge. Her death is what pushed this beyond a simple aggravated battery case. In September of 2022, Janine appeared in court. Her attorneys argued she'd been more bystander than attacker, pushing for something closer to involuntary manslaughter rather than felony murder. Prosecutors countered with the recording. Police testified that Janine had filmed the assault, encouraged it, joined in physically, kicked Ashley, and pulled her hair. They pointed again to Ashley's own message about being kicked by Daniel's sister, tying Janine's actions directly to Ashley's injuries. As the case moved forward, prosecutors eventually escalated the charges. According to later retrospective reporting, the strength of the video was enough to pursue malice murder, a charge carrying the possibility of life in prison. That later theory leaned heavily on deliberate deception, a planned confrontation, the ambush itself, repeated threats, the involvement of more than one attacker, and the sheer severity of violence captured on video. Prosecutor Ashley Talley later called the killing intentional and cold-blooded, language that should be understood clearly as the state's characterization, not an independently proven fact separate from the legal process. Antonetta's early defense rested on the idea that Ashley had shown up uninvited, looking for Daniel, and that whatever followed was never meant to end in death. The text messages badly undercut that story, since they proved Ashley had been deliberately drawn there. Janine's early defense similarly minimized her role, arguing she wasn't the main aggressor. Prosecutors pointed to her own admissions, Ashley's text, and the video to argue otherwise, that she'd been an active, willing participant, not someone standing off to the side. This case never reached a full murder trial in front of a jury. According to later reporting, both women accepted plea deals in 2024. Antonetta Stevens and Janine Gonzalez pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and to robbery. One retrospective source uses the phrase involuntary manslaughter instead, but the stronger weight of the available material points to voluntary manslaughter as the accurate final description. And that's the version this documentary follows. Both women are reported to be serving 20-year prison sentences, currently held at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia, with an expected release year of 2042. The available material doesn't include a fully itemized sentencing breakdown, exactly how each individual charge was sentenced, or whether the terms run concurrently. What can be said with confidence is simpler. Both women were convicted through plea agreements and are currently serving 20-year sentences, with a reported release date in 2042. Ashley's death devastated everyone close to her. Her sister Jessica spoke publicly about the severity of her injuries. Her cousin, Brianna Jameson, expressed anger toward the two women responsible. Relatives described Ashley as beautiful, inside and out. A GoFundMe campaign helped cover funeral costs and helped bring her body home to New York, the city where she was born and raised, before she headed south, hoping to build something better for herself and her son. According to memorial information, Ashley was ultimately cremated. Looking back across this entire case, a handful of pieces of evidence stand out as decisive. Daniel's phone and the deceptive messages sent from it, which tore apart Antonetta's early story that Ashley had simply appeared on her own. Janine's recording, which captured the confrontation, the threats, the violence, and her own role in it. Ashley's own text, describing being kicked by Daniel's sister. The medical evidence documenting catastrophic internal trauma. The body cam footage of Antonetta learning Ashley had died. And the recorded interviews with both Daniel and Janine, each one helping investigators piece together what had really happened, and exposing how far the earliest explanations at the scene had strayed from the truth. What sets this case apart isn't only the brutality of it, it's the fact that the people responsible seem to have documented their own crime. Investigators didn't have to rebuild this story purely from witness accounts or a slow, painstaking timeline. The attackers, in effect, handed over much of the evidence against themselves, and underneath it all sits one deeply unsettling truth. Ashley didn't stumble into danger by chance. She was manipulated, using the phone and the identity of someone she trusted completely. This story shouldn't end with Antonetta, and it shouldn't end with Janine. It should end with Ashley. She was 30 years old, a mother, someone who left New York behind, hoping for something better, for herself and her young son. A manager, a coworker people genuinely liked, a daughter, a sister, a cousin, a friend, to more people than this story could ever name. She left home chasing opportunity, and for a while, in Georgia, she found it. Her family remembers someone who could brighten a room simply by walking into it. Her son lost his mother. Her relatives had to raise money, not to celebrate some new chapter in her life, but to bring her body back to the city, where it all began. In the end, this entire case turned on two very different uses of the exact same kind of technology. One phone lured Ashley into danger, dressed up as a message from someone she loved. Another phone, in the hands of one of the women who attacked her, ended up preserving the truth of what happened to her, and helped make sure the people responsible were finally held accountable for taking her life.